The rain lashed against the windows like nature itself was unsettled, mirroring the storm brewing in Lance Parker's chest. As he stepped through the familiar glass doors of Parker's kitchen, something felt off. The layout was the same, the lighting soft and welcoming, yet a strange chill ran through him. Not from the weather, but from a quiet shift in the air. This place, once his pride and joy, now felt like a stranger. The overhead bell rang with that same cheerful chime he designed years ago to set a warm tone for guests. But tonight, it sounded hollow. Gone was the confident CEO in tailored suits and Rolex watches. Tonight, Lance was just a wanderer, a drifter in thrift store denim and scuffed boots, hiding behind a low baseball cap and 3 days' worth of stubble. He'd practiced the limp in his mirror for weeks. Not even his own reflection looked familiar anymore. That was the idea. He needed to see things with new eyes, the way a stranger would. The dining room buzzed with energy. Servers gracefully navigating through tables, the metallic rhythm of the kitchen a symphony of clinking pans, sizzling oil, and sharp blades hitting cutting boards. The scent of roasted garlic and fresh herbs wafted through the air, wrapping around him like a memory. This was his creation, his dream brought to life. One of 47 locations he'd built from scratch, each founded on a single, unshakable belief. Every guest should feel like family. But recently something had changed. The numbers had started whispering a different story, lower ticket averages, declining return visits, and then the emails began. Subtle at first, mentions of staff acting distant, of feeling like outsiders rather than guests. And this location, this one was a sore thumb. His regional manager had brushed it off with a glossy report and a forced smile. But Lance knew better. After 23 years in the business, you learned to trust more than spreadsheets. You trusted your gut. And his gut had been screaming for weeks. "Just one," he said, lowering his voice to a weathered southern drawl. One he hadn't used since childhood days on his grandfather's farm. The hostess, Jessica, if he remembered correctly from her file, barely looked up. Pink highlights framed a tired face, and her eyes remained fixed on the screen. She'd been here 8 months. Good reviews, polite, efficient. But now she barely offered a nod as she led him to a corner booth, the same spot he had mapped out in his mind earlier that week. From here, he could observe it all. The staff, the guests, the energy, or lack thereof. The vinyl seat groaned under his weight. A tear in the corner of the cushion caught his eye, small but significant. He'd paid for quarterly maintenance. That kind of detail didn't slip through the cracks unless something deeper was broken. Miranda arrived with the kind of smile that could survive 100 double shifts. Her uniform was neat, her order pad ready. Her name tag confirmed her identity, and Lance's mind ticked through her employee history like flipping pages in a mental file. 2 years with the company, transferred after a personality conflict that had never been fully explained. The regional manager had vouched for her, said she was solid. "What can I get started for you tonight?" she asked with polished charm. Lance nodded, pretending to scan the menu. He'd written half of it. Every item had been crafted with obsessive detail during endless hours in his test kitchen. He remembered arguing over the exact herb mix for the chicken parmesan, the balance of sweetness in the house-made balsamic glaze. This place was in his blood. "I'm not sure," he muttered, keeping his cover intact. "What would you recommend? Maybe something special?" There it was, a flicker. Miranda's eyes tightened, her lips compressed ever so slightly. It was brief. Blink and you'd miss it. But Lance had built his career on spotting the imperceptible. "Well," she said slowly, "we have our usual items. The chicken parmesan is pretty popular." He leaned in a little, curious now. "No specials?" "I thought y'all had something different each night." The question hung in the air. Every Parker's kitchen was built around the idea of nightly specials. dishes that sparked curiosity and delight, like a surprise waiting at the end of a long day. That promise had brought customers back week after week. He knew it, and so did Miranda. She hesitated, then glanced toward a table near the window. Lance followed her gaze. A couple sat there, laughing quietly over an artfully plated dish. Salmon, if he wasn't mistaken, with a cream sauce he didn't recognize, and roasted vegetables arranged with precision that screamed culinary pride. It wasn't on the standard menu. It wasn't in the training handbook. This was something different, elevated. That. Miranda paused again, then said it, the words slicing through Lance like cold steel. That's only for real customers. His breath caught. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it, with a calm, practiced tone that suggested this wasn't the first time. It wasn't even unusual, just policy. He felt something shift inside him, a slow, aching pull in his chest as the weight of those words settled in. For years, he'd built this empire on the idea that no one would feel less than in his restaurant, no matter their background, their clothes, their money, or lack of it. And now, here he was, on the outside, looking in. Just another guy in a weathered jacket, unseen, unimportant, not a real customer. And suddenly the rain outside didn't feel nearly as cold as the silence settling over him now. Lance felt heat rise to his cheeks, not from embarrassment, but a quiet, simmering anger he had to bite back before it showed. Real customers. The words echoed inside his head like a drumbeat. Miranda's tone wasn't rude, but there was something about the way she said it, rehearsed, like a policy she didn't agree with but had learned to recite. Real customers, you know, she added with a hint of hesitance. People who come here a lot, people the manager knows. Lance's jaw clenched as he offered a tight nod, playing the role. But inside, his mind raced. This wasn't about a dinner special anymore. It was about something bigger, an unspoken hierarchy that directly betrayed the principles Parker's Kitchen was built on. A two-tier system where warmth and effort were reserved for the inner circle, while newcomers were quietly pushed to the margins. He didn't need to look far to be reminded of what his business stood for. Just behind Miranda, a wooden sign hung proudly on the wall. Exceptional food, exceptional service for everyone who walks through our doors. The words stared back at him, unblinking. Mocking. I see, Lance said slowly, his voice even, but inside, the weight of disappointment sank deeper. His instincts as a businessman urged him to press further, but he had to stay in character. If he pushed too hard, he'd lose access. So, he shifted gears. So, how does someone become a real customer around here? Miranda's eyes darted toward the kitchen pass, where a tall man with a commanding presence was giving quiet instructions to the staff. Lance recognized him instantly. Paul Morrison. He had personally interviewed and hired Paul 3 years ago, impressed by the man's charm and resume. On paper, Paul had been everything Lance wanted in a manager, competent, driven, personable. But paper could lie. Miranda's lips tightened as she answered, Look, I can get you anything from the regular menu. The chicken parmesan's a favorite. Or maybe the beef stew. It's perfect on a night like this. Her tone softened slightly, trying to smooth over the tension. Lance nodded, but his eyes never left Paul. He watched how Paul moved through the restaurant, stopping to chat with a smiling couple, laughing at their jokes, refilling their water glasses himself. But when it came to other tables, young families, elderly patrons, or people who clearly weren't part of the inner circle, Paul barely offered a glance. It was subtle, but unmistakable. There was a system here, and it had nothing to do with service and everything to do with status. You know what? Lance said, closing the menu. I'll take the chicken parmesan, and maybe you can tell me more about that special sometime. I'm curious what makes a customer real around here. Miranda's smile flickered and fell. I'll get that in for you right away, she replied quickly. Her words clipped as she turned to leave. As she walked away, Lance reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Under the pretense of checking messages, he opened his notes app and began typing furiously. He logged everything: the time, the details of the exchange, Miranda's body language, the way her eyes had flicked to Paul, the selective hospitality. It was all there, written between the lines like a story begging to be uncovered. In 23 years of building Parker's Kitchen, Lance had learned one thing above all: when something felt wrong, it usually was. And what he was witnessing wasn't just negligence, it was a betrayal of the very soul of his business. The rain continued to drum softly against the glass, but Lance no longer heard it. His thoughts were already a dozen steps ahead, charting out the path he'd need to take. He had come in that night seeking clarity. Instead, he found rot beneath the surface. He didn't know yet how deep it ran, but he was going to find out. Miranda returned with his drink, and in that moment, Lance made a quiet promise to himself. He wouldn't stay on the sidelines anymore. From this point forward, he wouldn't just observe, he would infiltrate. He would become the nobody they thought he was, a shadow among the regulars. And from that position, he would uncover every lie, every secret. The hunt had officially begun. 3 nights later, he returned, precisely at 6:30 p.m., mirroring the timing of his first visit. But this time, his disguise had evolved. A different thrift store jacket, a pair of reading glasses he didn't need, and a slight change to his gait. He knew people remembered patterns, and blending in required breaking them. The restaurant was fuller tonight. Thursday crowds gathering for dinner, laughter bouncing off the walls. Lance chose a new table, this one with a direct view of the kitchen pass and the manager's station. He had spent the past few days studying personnel files, employee schedules, surveillance logs. Paul always worked Tuesdays through Saturdays, arriving like clockwork at 4 p.m. and staying until close. His evaluations were spotless, but spotless records often hid dirty truths. Lance unfolded a newspaper, a deliberate touch to make himself look older, more invisible, and pretended to read. His real attention was scanning the floor, waiting. It didn't take long. A couple in their 50s walked in. Paul's body language changed instantly. His face lit up like someone had turned on a switch. He moved swiftly across the floor. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen, your usual table," Paul beamed, his voice rising above the ambient noise. He sounded like a nephew greeting his favorite aunt and uncle. "Oh, Paul, you're too good to us," Mrs. Chen replied, gently patting his arm. "How's your mother doing with her therapy?" "Much better, thanks for asking," Paul said warmly. "She keeps asking when you're going to send more of those cookies." Lance's stomach tightened. This wasn't customer service. This was a social club masquerading as a restaurant. The Chens were guided to the best table in the house, the one Lance had seen the special dish served at before. Minutes later, Miranda appeared with what looked like complimentary bruschetta. Elegant, handcrafted, not on any printed menu. "The usual for tonight?" she asked, skipping the formality of a menu. "You know us too well," Mr. Chen chuckled. "And maybe ask the chef to make it extra special tonight. It's our anniversary." 32 years, Mrs. Chen added, her smile glowing. Lance noted the detail. 32 years. These weren't just frequent diners. They were part of something deeper. Trusted, rewarded, protected. Then came another piece of the puzzle. A younger man entered alone, heading straight for the bar. Within seconds, Paul was at his side. Lance strained to hear, catching only fragments. "The game last night was insane," the man was saying. "Your kid really pulled through in the clutch." "Don't remind me," Paul laughed. "I lost $50 on that play, but hey, that's half the fun, right?" Lance's heart thudded hard against his ribs. Gambling. Not only was Paul running a favoritism operation out of the dining room, he was casually admitting to side bets with customers. in his restaurant, under his name. Lance didn't know how far this rabbit hole went yet, but one thing had become crystal clear. The storm that brought him in was nothing compared to the one he was about to unleash. Each minute that passed seemed to peel back another layer of rot. Lance watched as Derek, friendly, confident, and clearly part of the inner circle, settled into a stool at the bar and ordered with a wink. The usual Wednesday special. There was no need for a menu, no clarification required. Paul simply nodded with a grin and vanished into the kitchen, like a magician preparing his next illusion. When the plate arrived, Lance's stomach turned, not from hunger, but disbelief. Pan-seared duck breast, lacquered in a deep cherry reduction, flanked by crisp asparagus and golden roasted fingerlings. The plating alone was 5-star caliber, the kind you'd expect in a high-end bistro, not a mid-range casual dining chain. And duck? That wasn't just off-menu. It was never supposed to be on menu. Duck wasn't in any vendor contracts, nor had it ever passed through the supply list for this location. And yet, here it was. Lance's pulse quickened. He watched every detail like a hawk. Derek ate leisurely, chatting with Paul like old friends reminiscing. When the meal ended, Derek stood, clapped Paul on the back, and walked out. No check, no card swipe, no cash exchanged, nothing. Lance's fingers tightened around the edges of his newspaper until the pages creased. His breath came shallow. The foundational belief he'd built Parker's Kitchen on, that good food should be accessible and equal, was crumbling right in front of him. The same quality, same service, for everyone. That was the promise. But the reality was far darker. Over the next hour, Lance watched and documented. Table after table revealed the truth. Paul's favorites got everything: prime seating, warm welcomes, hand-delivered dishes prepared with ingredients that didn't exist on the books, plates of lamb chops, lobster risotto, handmade desserts. Their drinks flowed freely, their checks mysteriously absent or reduced to a fraction of their worth. Meanwhile, newcomers and outsiders waited. Families with fussy toddlers left after being ignored too long. An elderly man asking about senior discounts was met with a sigh and eye roll. These were the customers who paid full price, who carried the business's weight. And yet, they were treated like inconveniences. And then there was the food itself. Lance recognized the cuts. Top-grade proteins, imported garnishes, aged cheeses. Ingredients that didn't belong here. Items that had no place in the food cost reports he reviewed monthly. His stomach churned, not from anger, but a deeper grief, like watching your life's work rot from the inside out. Where was this food coming from? Who was paying for it? And how long had this been happening? His phone buzzed. A text from his regional manager lit up the screen. "Everything looks great at downtown. Numbers are solid. Morale's high. Paul's doing a fantastic job." Lance stared at the message for a long beat, then scoffed quietly. Customer satisfaction was up, if you were on the guest list. The betrayal stung deeper than numbers ever could, because this wasn't just favoritism. It was theft, blatant, organized, and systematic. Paul wasn't just abusing his power. He was stealing from the company, from honest customers, and from every employee who still believed in doing things right. As the night wound down, Lance made his decision. He would return once more, but this time it wouldn't be to watch silently. It would be to act. Friday arrived with a different energy. The restaurant buzzed with a younger, louder crowd. First dates, post-work drinks, small groups clinking glasses under dim lighting. Lance altered his appearance again. No cap this time, a slightly wrinkled dress shirt and loosened tie, the image of a weary office worker grabbing dinner on the way home. He chose a table in Miranda's section. On purpose. Over the past visits, he'd studied her. The way her posture straightened around Paul's favorites. The way her smile tightened when dealing with strangers. Tonight, he would push for answers. As Miranda approached, she paused, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Back again?" she asked, her tone neutral. Lance's heart skipped. Had she recognized him? He adjusted his glasses, feigning confusion. "Sorry?" "Oh, nothing," she said, waving it off. "You just look familiar." He exhaled. "Long week. I'm just here for something good to eat." Miranda gave a half smile. "What can I get you tonight?" "I'm still curious," Lance replied, steadying his tone. "About that special you mentioned the other night. The one for regulars." He watched the flicker return to her eyes. The same micro-shift in expression. Nervous, alert. She looked toward the kitchen. Paul was there, laughing as he expedited plates with his usual dramatic flair. "Look." Miranda lowered her voice, leaning in, breaking the unspoken wall between server and customer. "You seem like a nice guy, so I'm going to be honest. That special, it's not really for everyone." "What do you mean?" Lance asked, already knowing, but needing her to say it. Miranda hesitated, then made a choice that startled even him. She slid into the booth across from him. A bold move, a breach of every rule. "Paul takes care of his people, the ones he knows. They get perks, better meat, fancier dishes, sometimes the meals comped. It's kind of a VIP thing." She shrugged as if it were obvious, as if this toxic little club was just the cost of doing business. "He says it builds loyalty." Lance swallowed the knot rising in his throat. "And everyone else?" "They pay full price. For the regular stuff." Miranda sat back, eyes weary. "It's not my call. I just serve the food." Then she looked around, stood quickly, tension in her shoulders. "But between you and me, those perks, they're not free." Lance leaned in, his voice quiet. "What do you mean?" She pulled out her order pad and tapped it. "That chicken parmesan you had last time, it's listed as $18.99. But when we serve Paul's friends' special dishes or cover their whole tab, we have to balance that out. Prices go up, quietly. Your dish that night? It rang up at $22.99. Lance felt a chill run through him. "You're telling me the regulars are footing the bill for Paul's inner circle?" "I didn't say that," Miranda replied quickly, eyes flicking toward the kitchen. "I'm just saying, food costs fluctuate." She was scared. Lance could see it clearly now, not just fear of being caught speaking out, but fear of the very machine she was trapped inside. The complicity, the silence, the knowledge that standing up might cost her everything. And for the first time, Lance realized just how deep this went. This wasn't just Paul. It was a culture, a sickness, a betrayal embedded into the bones of the place, and it had to end. "How long has this been going on?" Lance asked, keeping his voice low but firm. Miranda glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in. Her voice was barely a whisper now. "Since I started, 2 years ago, maybe longer." She exhaled, the weight of that admission pressing down on her chest. "Paul says it's good business, that happy customers spend more, bring their friends. But, honestly, I think it's just gotten out of control." Lance nodded as if casually processing her words, but behind the calm exterior, his mind was a whirlwind of realization and disbelief. This wasn't just about favoritism or sloppy management. It was organized deceit, a private ecosystem of corruption built inside his very own company. "Let me ask you something," he said slowly, measuring every word. "These friends of Paul's, do they ever pay full price? For anything?" Miranda shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable now. "Some of them do," she offered. "The Chens, they're decent people. They always leave generous tips, and they're respectful. But others—" Her voice faded off as she looked away. "Others," she looked back at him, frustration flashing across her face. "Others act like they own the place. Derek, that guy who shows up every Wednesday, he hasn't paid for a single meal in months, Claims he's doing marketing, bringing new people in. But I've never seen him come in with anyone. Miranda's tone grew bitter. And there's this group that comes on Sundays. Paul's poker buddies. They order the most expensive stuff, drink top-shelf liquor like it's water. And their tab, it always gets adjusted to next to nothing. Lance's hands, hidden beneath the table, curled into fists. Poker buddies. The picture was getting darker with every sentence. And what about the food for those meals? He asked, keeping his voice even. The duck, the steaks, the fancy stuff that's not even on the menu. Where does it come from? Miranda blinked, visibly thrown by the question. What do you mean? Well, Lance said carefully, if you're serving premium dishes to Paul's friends, dishes not listed anywhere on the standard menu, those ingredients have to be coming from somewhere. He watched realization flicker across her face, followed by something deeper, fear. Oh my God, she whispered. You think he's… I don't think anything, Lance interrupted gently. I'm just trying to understand how it works. But the moment was already broken. Miranda stood up abruptly, her eyes darting toward the kitchen. I need to put your order in. What was it again? Just the chicken parmesan? She nodded, already halfway gone. Lance let out a slow breath. He'd pushed too far, but he had what he came for. Confirmation. The whispers were real. Paul wasn't just bending rules. He was orchestrating a scam, siphoning money from the business and hiding it behind charm and manipulation. The question now was, how deep did it go? Saturday morning brought no relief. Lance sat in his home office, surrounded by spreadsheets, invoices, and inventory records that told a story of quiet theft. He'd pulled data from the past 6 months, point-of-sale reports, order histories, cost breakdowns. The numbers were damning. Food costs at the downtown location were 40% higher than any other Parker's Kitchen store. Yet revenue increases were marginal, just enough to avoid raising red flags. Premium ingredients were being ordered. Duck, aged beef, imported truffles. But those items never appeared in sales. The conclusion was unavoidable. Paul was cooking gourmet meals for his friends, off the books, paid for by hiking prices on unsuspecting customers. It was theft, plain and simple. And it was systematic. Lance rubbed his eyes and took another sip of cold coffee, his 4th cup of the morning. He'd built this company on trust. He believed in empowering his managers. He wanted Parker's Kitchen to be a place where people felt ownership, pride. And Paul had turned that vision into a playground for greed. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. Your 2 p.m. meeting with the regional manager has been moved to 4. Perfect. That gave him time for one more visit. This time during the lunch rush, when a different staff worked. He needed to know if Paul's influence had infected the whole team, or if the rot was isolated to the evening crew. An hour later, Lance stepped back into Parker's Kitchen wearing another layer of disguise. Baseball cap from a local college, flannel shirt, work boots. Just another tired contractor grabbing a bite after a long morning on site. The lunch crowd was entirely different. Office workers on break, parents with young kids, older couples who preferred a quieter time of day. The pace was calmer, the mood lighter. He was seated by a new face, a young man named Tyler, whose smile felt genuine and who spoke with warmth, not rehearsed cheer. When his server arrived, Lance was greeted by a middle-aged woman named Susan. Her presence was calm, professional, and oddly comforting. "What can I get you today?" she asked, pen poised. "I'm not sure," Lance replied, testing the waters. "Heard there are some special dishes, not on the menu?" Susan tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. "I'm sorry, but we only serve what's listed. We do have daily specials, though," she said, handing him a card with 3 neatly written items. "They're right here. Soup, sandwich, salad, all affordable, all legitimate." Lance felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the system hadn't rotted completely. He leaned in again. "What about for regulars?" he asked gently. "Do they get anything extra?" Susan blinked. "Every customer gets the same treatment here," she replied firmly. "Same menu, same care." He watched her work over the next 30 minutes. Efficient, kind, attentive. When a couple asked about a senior discount, she applied it cheerfully. When a toddler spilled juice, she brought extra napkins and knelt to clean up with a smile. This, Lance thought, is what I wanted Parker's Kitchen to be. But as the clock ticked toward 2 p.m., the atmosphere shifted. Paul walked in. His posture was different, confident, commanding. He moved through the space like a conductor ready to lead an orchestra. Within minutes, he was rearranging sections, giving direct orders, taking over the room. He approached Susan as she wiped a table near the kitchen. "Susan, I need you to swap sections with Miranda when she gets in." Susan looked up. "But I've had this section all week. The customers know me." "Miranda handles the regulars better," Paul replied, already walking away. "She knows their preferences." The sentence struck Lance like a slap. It wasn't just routine. It was strategy. Control. Susan looked like she wanted to argue. But then she sighed, nodded, and returned to cleaning, shoulders heavy with learned helplessness. At 2:30, Miranda arrived. Paul immediately pulled her aside, whispering, gesturing toward certain tables. He checked his phone, likely confirming reservations. The atmosphere shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. Then, Lance's phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Stop asking questions or you'll regret it." Lance froze. His heart pounded. Someone had figured it out. Someone knew he wasn't just a customer. He scanned the room, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. His disguises had worked so far, but something had cracked. And standing at the host station, eyes sweeping the room like a hawk, was Paul. Miranda quietly set silverware on freshly wiped tables, while Susan shuffled reluctantly into the back section. Lance sat frozen in place. Until now, he'd felt in control, playing the game, uncovering the rot. But that text had changed everything. This wasn't just about stolen steaks or inflated receipts anymore. Someone had seen him. Someone knew who he really was. The threat wasn't loud, but it was personal. It was real. He paid his bill quickly and walked briskly to his car, the weight of the revelation pressing hard on his chest. He had enough evidence to expose Paul. But what if Paul wasn't acting alone? What if the disease had spread deeper than he'd imagined? The message suggested surveillance, awareness, collusion. That night, as rain whispered against his windows, Lance made a decision. No more disguises, no more pretending. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was criminal. And it was time to face it head on. Monday arrived with a crisp bite in the air, the kind of fall morning that used to fill Lance with clarity. But today, he felt only resolve. He hadn't slept much. Instead, he spent the weekend poring through hours of security footage, financial spreadsheets, supplier logs. The truth was now undeniable. Paul Morrison hadn't just abused his role. He'd systematically robbed Lance's dream, turning a restaurant meant to serve everyone into a playground for the privileged few. At 10 a.m., Lance walked into the downtown Parker's Kitchen, not as a ghost or a shadow, but as himself. No cap, no disguise. Navy suit pressed to perfection. Shoes polished like glass. Lance Parker, founder and CEO, had come to reclaim what was his. He passed through the restaurant like a ripple of clarity. The morning crew barely noticed, busy prepping for lunch. But in the back office, Paul's voice rang through the walls. Casual, laughing, talking about his fantasy football picks. "Paul," Lance said, appearing at the doorway. His tone cut the room like ice. Paul turned. His face cycled, through confusion, panic, and a desperate smile. "Mr. Parker, wow, I didn't know you'd be coming in today. Is everything okay?" "That's exactly what I'm here to find out." He stepped inside and shut the door quietly. "Have a seat." Paul hesitated, still holding a paper schedule in one hand. Sir, if this is about the quarterly. I said sit down. The command carried the full weight of 23 years of leadership. Paul obeyed. Lance placed a thick folder on the desk, flipped it open, and began laying out the evidence, photo by photo. Derek dining without paying. The poker gang clinking glasses of wine that never appeared in records. Comped dishes worth hundreds. Paul opened his mouth, but Lance raised a hand. I'm not finished. Next came the spreadsheets, tracking inventory versus sales, showing cost inflation, proving deliberate manipulation. 6 months of deception dressed as hospitality. 6 months, Paul. That's how long you've been stealing from this company, and from every honest customer who trusted this brand. Paul's shoulders sagged. The facade was crumbling. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he whispered. It started small. Just a couple of meals. I thought I was building loyalty. With stolen duck, imported wine, building loyalty on the backs of families who saved up to dine here. I paid for those meals, Paul insisted, desperation leaking into his voice. Out of pocket, to create a VIP experience. Lance leaned forward, eyes locked. Show me the receipts. Paul opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Just air, guilt, and fear. I checked your finances, Lance continued coldly. You live modestly. You don't have the money to be paying for anything. You stole, Paul, and you lied. Silence stretched between them. The hum of the kitchen was a distant drumbeat. Paul's hands trembled as he reached for his coffee. The customers paid 20% more because of you, Lance said. You taxed the poor to feed your friends. You stole dignity from people who trusted us. Paul was crying now. I was in debt. The games, the bets. I thought if I could grow the business, earn back your trust. You betrayed it. Lance stood, voice rising for the first time. You turned my restaurant into your personal casino. You gambled with my reputation, my staff's loyalty, my customers' trust. I'll pay it back, Paul begged. Cut my salary. I'll work doubles. Just don't fire me, please. I have a family. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from mine. Lance turned to the door. You're not just fired. I'm pressing charges. The police will be here shortly. Paul's pleading voice followed him down the hallway, but Lance didn't stop. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about repair. 3 hours later, the restaurant was closed to customers. The staff gathered in the dining room, murmuring quietly. They knew something seismic had happened. Lance stood before them. He didn't hold back. He told them everything. Paul's scheme, the secret meals, the inflated prices, the lies. Faces shifted. Shock turned to clarity, clarity to outrage, and then relief. Susan raised her hand. I knew something was off. The way prices changed, the way Paul hovered around certain tables. Lance nodded. Why didn't you report it? To who? Miranda's voice was barely audible. He was the boss. He hired most of us. He controlled our hours, our reviews. We didn't know if it came from you, from corporate. That struck deeper than any betrayal. His own people had thought he was behind it. Lance steadied his breath. No, he said clearly. This is not who we are. It never was. Parker's Kitchen was built on one promise. Exceptional food, exceptional service for everyone. Not just for friends of the manager, not for gamblers, everyone. Tyler raised a hand, timidly. What happens now? Are we getting fired? No one who wasn't part of the fraud is losing their job, Lance assured him. But there will be changes. He pulled out a tablet, displaying the new digital menu system. No more secret specials, no more handwritten deals, every promotion, every price, fully visible to every customer. Miranda shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Parker, she said softly, I was part of it. I served those meals. I knew the prices were wrong. I should have said something. Lance studied her. He remembered the report, the one she'd submitted months ago to the regional manager, the one that had been buried. You did try, he said. You were ignored. Then, to everyone's surprise, you're being promoted to acting manager. Miranda blinked in disbelief. "You know what went wrong," Lance continued, "and I believe you can help rebuild this place. You'll have direct access to me and full support from the regional team." He turned back to the staff. "Company-wide, we're implementing audits, anonymous feedback systems, and every employee will have a confidential way to report misconduct." Susan raised her hand once more. "What about the customers who paid too much, the ones who didn't get a fair shot?" Lance smiled for the first time in days. "They'll be getting a credit, 20% back on every dollar they spent here in the last 6 months. It's not perfect, but it's a start." The room was quiet. Then Tyler clapped. And one by one, the rest joined him. Not in celebration of punishment, but of possibility, of integrity restored. Lance stood there watching them begin prep for the dinner shift, knowing this road to healing would be long, but certain of one thing: Parker's Kitchen would rise again, better, fairer, stronger than ever, and this time everyone would have a seat at the table.